Ooh, looks like we're live, boys.
All right.
Hey. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the first ever State of Remote Podcasting webinar. So thank you everyone for being here and for telling us where you're at in the world. And we'll start off with who we are. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm Zachariah Moreno, the co-founder and CEO of SquadCast.fm.
And I'm Rock Felder, and I'm the co-founder and CFO of SquadCast.
And I'm Julian Lewis. I'm the co-founder of StudioPod.
And we also have in the chat with you all, TJ from StudioPod and Alex from SquadCast to help with the chat and answer all of your questions. So
TJ is actually 6 feet away this way.
Emphasis on the 6 feet, right? We just wanted to let everyone know we're practicing safe practices, y'all.
Of course.
Right. And before we get started here, be sure to stick around to the end. We'll be giving you a chance to download the full report of the Remote Podcast Stats Data Report, so you can dig in a little bit deeper into those statistics and see all those visualizations that we're going to go over in our webinar together today.
All right, so I'll kick it off. So like we said, we are SquadCast, and remote content production is our specialty. We've been helping podcasters and audio content creators record quality audio remotely with their guests and co-hosts from like anywhere in the world. And we're really excited to share the findings in this report with you all. So Julian, share with us what you and TJ have been working on at StudioPod.
Yeah, most definitely. So as mentioned, I'm Julian Lewis, co-founder of StudioPod. But actually, I was a client of StudioPod. TJ, who I mentioned, is over here to my left. He started StudioPod really to help people with like the editing and the production aspect of podcasting. And I had my own podcast, Couple Collective, if you want to check it out. And really, had the ability to just like leave my podcast here. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is immerse ourselves into the podcasting landscape. And meeting you two gentlemen has allowed for us to do that. And I think that's kind of like the genesis of like how we started this conversation and why StudioPod is a part of this is because, you know, you guys, we've seen as being like thought leaders in the space, and we really wanted to uncover some of the data that you were sitting on. And I know that you guys will talk about, you know, how you're going to be leveraging that data and why you're focused on giving it out. But it's something that we're excited to be a part of.
Yeah, so that gets into why we're here today, the Remote Podcast Stats Industry Data Report. That's a new thing. So let's start off with like, what is that? So we're big fans and students of, and we're inspired by the report that Libsyn and Rob Walsh present every year on the state of podcasting. Also, Edison Research produces the Infinite Dial report annually, and we were really inspired by the data and the transparency and kind of giving back to the community through data to help everybody stay informed and kind of best practices and all of those things. But we asked ourselves, like, what interesting data could we contribute to the community in a similar fashion? So the answer to that question turned out to be very fascinating for a few different reasons. So Libsyn and Edison, they focus on podcast publishing and listening, which is really important and where we've seen a lot of growth in the industry, and we have a lot of metrics and data to demonstrate that growth. But on the flip side of that, we found ourselves upstream from publishing and listening with the recording and production of that content that all our listeners love. So we felt like we had kind of a different position and amount of data to bring to that. So while there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out on the internet for remote production, best practices like popular equipment, recommendation from influencers, we saw a different, unique opportunity to bring the podcast community the real data that you all deserve.
Yeah. So, Julian, do you want to pull up the report on share screen, and then we can quickly cover what the methodology is, just so we can give them some details before digging into the report?
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Rockin'.
Yeah. So really quickly, we're just going to share. So this is part of the report. And like Zach said, we'll be providing this to you all shortly after this ends. So the source of the data is from hosts and guests, co-hosts, even all recording on SquadCast. And the sample size is, it's pretty significant. It's 5 times greater than the infinite dial report. And we're not doing that to like flex on them. That's just like the standard that we are trying to hold ourselves to. We really look up to what they've done there. It's been great work. So, if you haven't looked into that report, please do. It's really interesting, especially year to year, to see the changes in podcasting. So the 2019 data is 5 times larger than the infinite dial report. And what's even more interesting is the 2020 sample size for the first 3 months is even larger than 2019 and growing rapidly. So we're going to go into, some of the changes we've seen year over year or year to year from that. So we can't wait to share that with you all as well. So again, because the source of the data is hosts and guests recording on SquadCast, we care really deeply about the privacy and security. So all of the data is anonymized, and we believe that the data is not ours to sell or profit from. So we felt like packaging it up and sharing with the rest of the podcast community was the best way to share this. So Julian, can we start digging into this report?
Yeah, most definitely. But I guess before I hit the next slide, should we throw up a poll and get an understanding? Oh, it looks like the poll's up there.
Here we go.
Yeah, we'd love to get an understanding of what do you think is the most popular used mic? So go ahead and answer that. And I guess while we wait for people to kind of populate that, I'd love to understand like your journeys with microphones. I'm happy to tell mine, but what's the first mic that you ever recorded with?
Start, Zach.
Yeah, so I like a lot of podcasters in my first podcast movement. We launched SquadCast in beta in Anaheim in 2017. So thank you, podcast movement and the community, for being super welcoming to newcomers like ourselves. But I was really captivated by how microphones looked at that point, not necessarily how they sounded. So I wanted, a blue Yeti to be super cool, like all these YouTubers and people that I saw on camera. So I know there's some kind of baggage around that within the audiophile community, but they're great microphones and they're really accessible. So I don't think that, they're taboo or anything like that, but it's pretty polarizing. So that was my experience. How about you?
You want to go ahead, Rock?
Yeah. So mine was, coming out of it as let's just say I was more of a listener. So I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was probably using one of these to record first. Apple earbuds were just straight through there, which, we found on SquadCast isn't the worst thing. So if that's like all you or your guest has, it's going to get you through the recording and still sound pretty great. But yeah, definitely, once I started listening to some of the greats like Dave Jackson and Rachel Corbett and Pat Flynn, I kind of, it didn't cost too much to upgrade to this ATR 2100, which is good, but it certainly was an upgrade. So what's your story, Julian?
Yeah, for me, so right now at home, I have the ATR 2100, and the one I'm on right now is the SM7B.
It's a beautiful
TJ
mic.
TJ definitely hooked it up with the studio here. But my first one is very interesting. So if y'all remember the very first Amazon Prime Day, I was searching for something to buy and actually didn't even have a vision of a podcast. And when I saw that Blue Yeti, similar to you, Zach, it was just a beautiful piece of machinery. And I was like, you know what?
They look cool.
Start a podcast. Yeah. So I actually started it based off of seeing that mic. So my first one was a Blue as well. All right. Should we click over?
Yeah, it looks like we got some poll data first. Let's go over that. So it looks like Blue is the number one with 42%, Audio Technica following second with 32%, followed by Shure and Rode. So I think that's pretty right on for what I was expecting from kind of the anecdotal. And I think doing this poll versus actually the data is actually a really great way to show the difference between, anecdotal popularity versus actual real world data. Yep. So let's get into the real world data.
All right, awesome. Drum roll.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So as you can see,
you were right. Yeah. The community was right.
Indeed. So yeah, the Blue is very much dominant here at over 50%. But Audio Technica is in that second spot, just like the community shows.
So someone in the chat asked, what is the controversy about Blue? I wouldn't say it's a controversy. You just hear a lot of the podcast coaches, if you will, they don't really care for it. And I get why. My personal opinion is that Blue did a really good job of making a beautiful microphone. And so, and it's hard to resist. So, you see those things and you want it. I get it. But, from the podcast coach's perspective, there's a lot, I guess better mics for podcasting that you can get, and it's affordable. So, what have you guys seen as far as that debate goes, Zach?
Yeah, it's a bit polarizing. So, they're accessible. We see people on video using them all the time. They sound great. The challenge with them is that they put a lot of onus on controlling your environment because they're so sensitive. So they pick up a lot of environmental sounds that make post-production more challenging. So maybe that's why coaches and post-production people aren't fans. But in my opinion, if you can control your environment enough and you're conscious of how that can affect the quality of your audio, it's a fine microphone. And certainly a lot of content is created with them. They look beautiful. They sell them in all these different colors. This is not an endorsement for Blue, by the way. They just are really popular for a reason. And we see that come through in our data of both hosts and guests that record with us on SquadCast.
Yeah, and I think y'all hit on all the great points. And Chad, who's in the chat right now, he just mentioned like making sure you're speaking into the correct side of it.
That's a huge one.
You definitely have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, people have a tendency to just kind of put it on Omni and put it in the middle of a table and then kind of like have a conversation. It does work, but you'll hear that distance, mic technique, all of those things that really go the extra mile to capture really quality audio. Whereas the Audio Technica is more of a forgiving microphone for your environment and is a little bit more rugged. It's lighter weight. You can just kind of throw it in a bag. Where the Blue microphone is very heavy. I'm actually using a bit of a tangent, but the Blue also makes this mic arm here, this compass mic arm, and it's really stiff and sturdy because that microphone is so heavy. So there's that factor of it as well. But they come kind of with a little tabletop stand, and that if your table's moving or your elbows are kind of on the table, it'll pick up all that stuff because it's so sensitive.
So someone in the chat asked what mics we're using. So Mark, to answer your question, Zach and I are both using the ATR 2100, which I believe is no longer available anymore, right? They like made a new model. I can't remember the exact model name.
Yeah. Well, this one is XLR, you can see, like I'm using, and then Rock is using USB. So that's one of the reasons this is really popular as well, because you don't need an audio interface. You can just go straight through USB. It's also got a headphone jack on the bottom. So you can like plug in headphones directly there and do active monitoring on yourself with zero latency. And all that's like on board within this mic. So that's really impressive that Audio Technica can make an affordable mic and add all these features into it. So that's really cool. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I've traveled with mine to lots of different podcast community events, and just putting it in my bag, like I never really worry about it getting dinged up or messed up or anything. Where like that Shure SM7B, I don't think I would just put that in my bag, right? I would probably put that in something and then put it into the bag, because you start to get a little bit more delicate at that level.
Handle with care. So yeah, Julian, I think you already mentioned it, but just mention what the mic you're using, just for the folks who might have joined us late here.
Yep, I'm using the Shure SM7B, and this is honestly is my first time using it. I've been staying out of the studio while shelter in place, but at home I use the ATR 2100. But using this thing today it's powerful. TJ and I were recording across the table earlier today, and I love this thing.
Yeah, and as we get into the some of the 2020 data that we'll have a kind of a snapshot towards the end, we'll see some trends where this is actually evolving over time. And I think Rode has come out with some podcast specific hardware. I've heard really good things about that. So let us know in the chat if you're a fan or have tested those out. I know Samson, I saw the Q2U mentioned in the chat. That's a really great microphone, and having met the team from Samson, they are very focused on empowering podcasters with really accessible hardware. And of course, the Scarlett is not a microphone, so we haven't touched on that one yet. The Scarlett is an audio interface, so if you're using an audio interface on SquadCast, that's as far as like we can see and track is the input, the name of the input device is where this came from. So our friends at Focusrite, of course, make the Scarlett audio interfaces like the 2i2, and there's even bigger options there. The Sound Devices Mix Pre 3 is not on this chart, but that's another really popular interface, although much more expensive. So, want to show some love to our friends at Focusrite for being the only audio interface on this list here.
Dan will be happy.
Yeah, it's a great piece of equipment. Also very rugged. Also very backpackable, if that's a word I can use. And has great preamps and sounds good. So I think the Rode might also include the Rodecaster Pro. That's another audio interface. So yeah, let us know what you think. We love that this is a clear picture that supports the anecdotal evidence. So I think that that's good. It shows that the advice coming from the podcast community is rooted in reality and is solid advice to the community. So it's nice to have some real numbers for that.
Indeed. All right, should we move forward?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, awesome. So next we're gonna highlight headphones. So I'm just gonna click right into it. So what we see on the left-hand side here is actually most people do not use headphones. And I know that y'all have some best practices when using SquadCast. So I'd love to hear about those, but I can give a little anecdote about the headphones that I'm actually using right now. So if y'all have seen me at Evolutions or just in the wild, I'm always wearing a hat. And so I was one of the folks that was like, I'm not going to wear headphones because then I can't wear over the ear when I'm wearing my hat. And so, it took some knowledge being dropped from TJ as well as the gents at SquadCast for me to really understand why, which they'll talk about. But right now I'm using some Mackies. They're 220s, and they're perfect. And they just go right over my ear. They actually like disconnect right here at the top. And so they're perfect for when I want to wear my hats, which is always.
I didn't even know that hat came off, man.
Oh, yeah. It really doesn't.
Yeah. So go for it.
I was just going to ask, so why do you recommend that people wear headphones when they're recording?
Yeah, it's not obvious. So, have empathy for why that, might be kind of seem like a weird question, but this is the, remote podcast stats. So anytime we're recording audio, even if it's not remote, the recommendation from professional audio engineers and sound designers and musicians or anybody working in audio, anytime, it's not a coincidence that when you see people like in studios that they're wearing headphones. That's not a coincidence. That's not a fashion statement. They're not that comfortable really for anyone, so they mess up everybody's hair. So I don't think it's because of those reasons. But that begs the question, what are the reasons? Like, doesn't my audio quality come from my microphone, right? Like, that's totally intuitive to think. But what can happen, especially when you're recording remotely, like we help people on SquadCast do, you end up having this problem that can occur, and everybody's held a microphone up to a speaker or heard what that sounds like. I won't replicate it for you because it's terrible and it's painful, but it causes this gnarly feedback loop between what's coming out of the speakers and what's being picked up by the microphone, and it just keeps going around and around, and it drives humans crazy. So we don't want that to happen, and that doesn't happen when you record on SquadCast or any kind of remote conversation platform, because there's some software that's running under the hood that is called echo cancellation. So echo cancellation is a weird jargony term, but all that means is that it's trying to prevent that feedback loop that I just described from happening. And it does that by running some software in the background to prevent that feedback loop from happening. But to do that, it needs to kind of duck the volume down for the microphone, and that then affects our quality. So we are always in pursuit of the best quality audio possible for our listeners' experience and for our own experience. And that's why we're here, right? Is for quality audio. So to avoid that, we could use echo cancellation and lean on that. But it, like I said, it degrades the quality. So where does that leave us? That leaves us in a place where you can use headphones to do that same, to prevent that same problem from occurring. And that does not impact your quality of your audio. So you can turn echo cancellation off if everybody's wearing headphones, and you will get pristine audio quality without having to run that echo cancellation process that I mentioned before. So the headphones are essentially physical echo cancelers, is a way to think of it. Whereas if it's coming out of your speakers, it's got to do some weird stuff behind the scenes, and that affects our quality. So that is why we always recommend recording audio with headphones on. So you don't have this feedback loop. You don't have any need for echo cancellation, and your microphone can just focus on doing its job of recording audio without any volume ducking or echo cancellation or any of that weird stuff.
What about Bluetooth headphones?
That's a really good question. So Bluetooth headphones are fine. They work well. We support them on SquadCast. But what we've noticed can happen is that sometimes phones and computers will both be trying to connect to them because we have these as like saved devices, right? And a connection can switch, and that can interrupt the quality of the audio and audio signal, quite obviously. Another thing that can happen is the battery can get low over time, right? We can record like an hour or 2 hours on SquadCast. As the battery starts going low, the connection can be interrupted from that as well. So we, of course, support Bluetooth. Everybody loves Bluetooth, the convenience of it. I have a pair, but I don't use them when I'm recording audio. So that's the best practice that we recommend, is turning echo cancellation off, wearing headphones. Do not use speakers because it will have to do that echo cancellation process. So wear headphones, and then wired headphones are best because you don't have the battery, you don't have the connectivity is very clear, right? You plugged it into a device and that connection will stay solid.
So I don't know if you guys been watching the chat, but I think you'll be excited to see, Zach, that like a lot of folks are really excited to hear that you're pushing that kind of knowledge and best practice. And then also people saying that they recommend to their guests and co-hosts, like always record with headphones. So, I think a lot of us in podcast land and audio land, we get that, or we've learned the hard way at least. So why is it that like 50% are still recording through the speakers? And I think it's, safe to say, and we can, talk about it here, of course, but it's probably the guests that are not the ones coming with the equipment that we're recommending here. And just to be clear, we're not saying you need to get the fancy headphones or a mic. I mean, certainly going to a place like StudioPod is going to help and increase the sound quality and the production quality of your podcast. But your guests may not have that option. So but again, wearing something as easy as earbuds like I'm wearing, a lot of people have those laying around. But again, if we get it, like if you want to record that content, if it's a guest that means a lot to you, like maybe getting that content and taking the risk of recording it straight through your computer microphone, it's worth it to you. And we get that. So we try to, empower multiple workflows, but I do think it's, we see it as a job of ours to, help everybody understand how to record a podcast better. And specifically for us at SquadCast, do it remotely better.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that, to my knowledge, anyway, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but SquadCast is the only option that gives you the ability to turn it on and off, echo cancellation. So that alone shows that you can record with speakers. That's totally fine. But we are aware that people use SquadCast to get very high quality audio, and to do that, headphones go a long way to helping get that quality audio, which is not intuitive because we think of our microphone, like I said before. So it's really the combo of the two. And, just always being in pursuit of that. Of course, we, make recommendations to our guests. We prepare them for this. They're not usually professional podcasters. So checking with them, recording a sound check. Thank you, Alice. That's a really great idea. Another recommendation and best practice that we recommend is when you connect to your guest on SquadCast, before you jump straight in, we're all eager to get that content recorded and out to our listeners. But, record a 1 minute recording with your guest, and then you can listen back to it. You can record for a minute, hit stop. You can listen to it right in the session in SquadCast without having to leave. Make sure everybody sounds good, and then jump into the full production, building confidence along the way. And you'll hear if they're using speakers and if the volume's being ducked and echo cancellation and that kind of stuff. So, hey Evo, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. So I think that's the chart on the right is we'd like to see it be the other way around, and we know that there's a lot of people who are in the headphone camp with us. So when you talk to other podcasters, talk to guests, mention this to them. Say, hey, do you guys record with headphones? Do you record with headphones? Do you let your guests record with speakers? Like, that can affect the quality. It's I think an education piece that we're all in this together, and all in pursuit of that quality audio. So then that gets us into the other side of the chart. What do we got going over there, Julian?
Yeah, definitely. So, when people are using headphones, it looks like AirPods are popping there. And I know, Rock, that you wanted to talk a little bit about that. And just to be clear, I know Blue has the highest percentage, but if I'm correct, it's somebody plugging their headphones into their Blue mic. Is that correct on SquadCast?
Yeah, you can do it either way. I think if you plug it in directly into the mic, you'll get the zero latency voice tracking, so you'll hear yourself. Some people want that and like that. Some people find it incredibly distracting to hear themselves. So that's why we recommend the sound check as kind of like a happy medium in between there.
Yeah.
If you plug into your computer, you won't get that active voice tracking, but you'll still have the output go through your headphones.
Yeah, Rock, curious your thoughts on those AirPods that are popping.
Well, I'm a big fan of the AirPods. I try to live in a wireless world right now, but I thought, we have this unique vantage point of seeing people's results using some of this equipment. And as much of a fan of AirPods and Bluetooth as I am, we wanted to take this opportunity to just help folks help each other, and mostly their guests, I think, are the ones that are connecting with these devices, and they're probably having, especially these days, Zoom after Zoom after Zoom call, or SquadCast after SquadCast after SquadCast call, and just something to be mindful of, because they're going to become more popular and more used, I think. So it's just something that we wanted to share to help you and help you help your guests, just because they're great tools, but there are some disadvantages with the Bluetooth.
Yeah, and I see Chad's always dropping knowledge in here. We might have to get him in a future webinar, but
yeah, thanks,
he's
Chad.
Talking about $10 earbuds are better than nothing. And for me, being a host of a podcast, I've actually shipped equipment to my guests in the past, just to make sure that I can maintain that quality. Not an option for everybody, but definitely something worth exploring if you can.
Yeah. I see some other questions about connectivity. So yes, SquadCast works on Android, hotspot. There's some of that stuff in our docs. Check that out. Video recording, we can get to that later on.
We got Q&A at the end.
Yeah. Keep it. A little bit of patience, and we'll get to that. We're happy to talk. We're always being transparent. So with the equipment here, we see the headphones into the Blue microphone. We see the AirPod Audio Technica. I think that's these headphones are really popular. I know we see the Scarlett show up again, and then a few other kind of friendly companies that we mentioned before. So yeah, I think a pretty good indication of popular headphones that we see. Anything else you want to touch on here?
I think we're good to move forward. I'm definitely excited about this next piece.
Yes,
about kind of the podcasting rhythms. So I think first and foremost, like when people are actually recording. So I'll jump over here to the next slide. And I think this is something that fascinated me, because my assumption was, because maybe it is for me, that podcasting is a side hustle, right? In terms of the time in which I record, it's usually later in the day or late at night. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think that it's actually like during the working hours.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of a trip to us as well. So, kind of early morning here on the West Coast, we see our friends on the East Coast online, and I think that that all kind of balances out here towards like the first half of the day. And then, we don't have the days of the week here in this graphic, but this is also supportive of what you were saying, Julian, where you'd think it would be like nights and weekends. It's mid-morning weekdays. So I think that supports, the level of professionalism, the kind of the availability of scheduling with guests. There's a number of factors that would go into this, but we felt we agreed with you that this was pretty fascinating to see kind of the distribution across the time of day.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm thinking like, like when are your guests available? If people are getting experts, most likely they're trying to carve out time during their workday to talk with you. And so you have to be ready to be able to capture them when they're ready.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point and kind of a surprise to us to see it, the full scope of how it all laid out. But I do wonder though, how this chart would look if it was time spent editing. Now, of course, we don't have that data right now because we're not an editing platform. But maybe when people are solo, that's when they start burning the midnight oil a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yep. And this also is mirrored. We, of course, want to bring this data to life for the podcast community, but we also use this internally to help us with knowing when to provide the best support that we care deeply. I saw somebody mentioning in the chat about our support. So thank you for that. And, we have always cared deeply about providing podcasters and your guests with support. And we use this information to balance that out and make sure that we're always available. So it's really, really cool to see this data helpful to the podcast community, but also in our response and service of the podcast community.
Yeah, and I love John's comment. So he's saying that he asks like the guests like when they're at their peak, right? Because he wants to make sure that they're fresh. Makes perfect sense.
Nice.
I think in terms of recording different podcasts, like TJ and I are working on one called the Pod on Podcast, hence the banner behind us. And we recorded on a Sunday afternoon and we were drained and the content was awful. And so we're like, you know what? Like, let's get this going at a different time of day when we have a little bit more energy before TJ's done his 160 push-ups in 10 minutes. So we can have that energy to kind of record.
It's impressive.
Awesome. It is.
It's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the time of day kind of distribution that we see people connect and recording from all over the world.
Awesome. So moving forward, looking at the percent of sessions of the session that somebody's actually recording versus just being in a session. Do you guys want to break down like what the session is versus the actual recording, just so people understand?
Yeah, this one is my favorite and the most fascinating to me. And I believe it communicates a number of things that are superpowers within podcasting. So as we dig a little bit deeper into here, let's define some things like to your point. So the session is the connection that you have, your conversation with your guest. So on SquadCast, you can connect with your guests and co-host and have a conversation before hitting record. And then after you hit stop. So that leaves us with the entirety of the session. And then at some points in the middle, you'll record and you'll stop. And depending on what kind of recording you're doing, maybe if it's an audio drama, you'll do many takes or something like that. You can record and stop as much as you like. But most people having an interview conversation, you connect with your guest, you do a little bit of setup, maybe a sound check like I recommended. You have a little bit of networking, kind of get to know you, talk about maybe where you want the conversation to go is what we like to do on our podcast, Between Two Mics. Maybe somebody has a book coming up or something that they want to announce. You can kind of discuss a little bit about the flow of conversation to move it in that direction over time. And then after you're finished recording, there's like debrief that you can have. You can have conversation. You can network further. You can ask, hey, who else should I have on my show? Is a great question that we find helpful to continue adding value for your listeners. So this information that we see is 32%. So about 1/3 of the conversation of the whole session, 1/3, the middle third of that is spent recording. So that tells us a number of things, that people are getting a lot of value from the networking and kind of conversation aspect of connecting on SquadCast, in addition to the on the record recording. So you have kind of off the record, you have on the record. I should also mention our backups contain the full conversation. So if somebody says something great that wasn't part of that kind of middle recording, you can pull that out of the backups as a kind of a pro tip. But we found this super interesting to see that I thought it would have been more. I thought it would have been more time spent recording, less time spent having kind of conversation. But how do you read into this, Rock?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think people are experiencing the beauty of podcasting. I mean, on a personal experience, I was really surprised how great a mechanism or tool or medium is the right word for building relationships on, and one of the things I joke about is I found it easier to get people on the podcast than it was to get a regular meeting or a coffee meeting with them. And so I think that's awesome. And to me, it shows that, people are probably using that time in some way to build the relationship, not just the actual conversation that's being recorded. And that's great because a lot of the times that these conversations that we hear is awesome, but it would be interesting to hear what happens before and after. I imagine before, one of the best practices that we recommend is getting on the same page with somebody, asking them when their hard stop is, maybe doing a sound check like one of the folks in the chat recommended. And then also just saying like, hey, is there anything that you absolutely want to cover, not cover, stuff like that. And then hopefully that end is kind of maybe debriefing on it or talking about what's next. Another thing that we suggest is don't let the interview be the last time that you interact with these people. Keep this relationship developing. There's a reason why you interviewed this person, most likely, assuming the interview goes well too. So, whether it's to have them on the show or just to continue fostering that relationship, that's one of the things that is really magical about this medium. It's great to, build and cultivate this audience that's like craving your content. But then you're also, if you're interviewing people, you're building relationships with folks that you probably find interesting or that are figures in the space. So yeah, now this is a pretty fun one too, Zach, because it's kind of how we spend our sessions when we're recording our podcast, right?
I think so. It's a pretty good mirror of that. And what do you think about this, Julian?
Yeah, definitely. So it was very fascinating to me because, when somebody comes into our physical studio to record with their guest in person, if they're going to record for an hour, we recommend that they book 2 hours. That way they have the ability to interact with their guests before, record, and then interact with their guests after. And we offer, adult beverages. So if they want to get a little bit loose before they get into the studio, we give them that ability. So, it makes perfect sense that when you're preparing for an interview, regardless if it's in person or via SquadCast, that you should still have that prep before and continue to build that relationship after. And in fact, when we have people come and record, whether they're an individual or a corporation, we tell them like, hey, like, don't just set like a set recording time, like get into the green room, hang out for a while, have a conversation. And then if you want to, you could spend a little bit of time afterwards as well.
Yeah, exactly. What I was going to echo is what does this say about scheduling? Like if you're going to record and produce an hour-long podcast, maybe schedule 2 or 3 hours. That way you have that knowledge that, okay, the middle third of this will be my actual production. Unless you're going to record an hour and then cut it down to 20 minutes or something like that. So we always recommend we do everything possible to be respectful of your time as the host. It's incredibly, it's a lot of work to podcast before and after you're actually recording, but also be respectful of your guest time. So there is a real world constraint with scheduling, but we hope that this information is helpful to schedule more buffer time so you can maximize that networking potential. If you need some buffer time to set up and do sound checks and build up confidence, it also takes the pressure off of I only have an hour. I only have this person's time for 1 hour. You can build in some buffer time there and really build up that confidence. And if your guest is getting antsy, just let them know this is all so we get quality audio for our listeners, which is going to make you sound credible to them. And there's research on that to support that. And we want everybody to sound good. So a little bit of setup time, that's not going to show up in the interview of what you publish, right? So I think that can all go towards building confidence, building networks, and make sure that middle third is a really great kind of conversation. I know one of our advisors, Jordan Harbinger, he kind of secretly hits record. He doesn't really tell people like, okay, now we're going to hit record. He just kind of, asks them some questions. I know a common one that I've heard NPR people recommend is like, what did you have for breakfast? And that way you just kind of are out of the thought of, oh, I'm on stage now, I need to record and sound official and all that stuff. That can go a long way to really easing into it and building up that comfort and confidence.
Yeah, most definitely. And if there's a common topic that you vibe on that will help to bring that energy up before you get started, do so. Like, the next time that TJ and I tried to record on a Sunday, it was when The Last Dance was coming out, and I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan. TJ's a huge basketball fan. His handle is at TJ for 3, which I've never seen for it. So I don't know how good of a shot he actually is. But like, because we vibed on basketball, we just started talking about The Last Dance, and that got our energy up. And then we hit record, and we recorded a great episode the second time around.
Yeah. And Tom asked a really great question, and it gets to kind of how pricing works on SquadCast. Like, okay, if I only need 30% of the session for my actual production, does that count against my recording time? Because SquadCast is priced by recording time, much like a physical studio is. Like I believe StudioPod is. So the answer to that question is no. Only the time where you're actually recording audio is counted against your plan. So the rest of the time you can just have an open-ended conversation. Like Rock and I talk on SquadCast all the time and never hit record. Granted, that's a little bit different because we're living and breathing this every day. But you can do the same if you want to connect with your guests. That's not like counting against your plan. Only when you're actually recording quality content.
So I think Rodney brings up a good point in the chat that are we saying to just record without people knowing?
No, that is not what we're saying. And in fact, in the green room, when you come into SquadCast, there's a little bit of language with a milk and cookies icon to make you aware and your guest aware that backups are being recorded the entire time. And also there's recording indicators for everybody in the conversation that you are recording or you are not recording. And there's even a timer, and all of those things go towards communicating that we are recording quality content. We said before, we respect your privacy, we respect all of those things, but to record backups in that way, we wanted to have that extra level of reliability and security. And to do that, we capture the full conversation, and that's saved a ton of people's production because, sometimes we forget to hit record, something along those lines, right? As we can imagine. So we're very transparent about that, and I'm glad that you asked.
And Tom said, thank you for letting the unused monthly time roll over. That's very cool.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah. I will say with StudioPod, you are renting out the entire studio. And so unfortunately, like when you hit record, that's not when you're necessarily paying. However, we do have 900 square feet, I guess, where we have a studio and then we have a community space. And so you can come in earlier and you can hang out in the community space. But once you're in the studio, because we can't have anybody else come in, we do charge you once you're in the actual space, but you can hang out in the community room or in this like living room area that we have as well.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot has been said about podcasting and the intimacy of it with the listener, but I think this data shows that the networking superpower, the connection building is real, and we see it come to life here in this data.
Awesome. Should we give a preview of what we've seen to date in 2020?
Yeah, so this is all 2019 data. So full year is the scope, and we've seen a lot of momentum in even a few first months of 2020. So we felt like we needed to bring that to life and share that with you. So let's get into that.
Awesome. All right. So first up with the equipment. So instead of showing charts, we wanted to show kind of like the changes in percentages. And out of curiosity, any surprises for you, gents?
Honestly, not. I was surprised, I guess, when I initially saw that jump in AirPods. It does kind of stick out. But then again, because we've seen so many new folks to podcasting in general, in general, the guests are not used to recording audio or, come from all different types of experience when it comes to technology and podcasting. But I think this speaks to that more new people to podcasting and audio, whether they're the host or guest are in the mix. So it didn't surprise me when I thought about it at first, but when I initially saw it, it was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. What about you?
I feel similarly. Yeah. I mean, the AirPods, I think over the Christmas holiday, the second version of those came out with the active noise cancellation and all that fancy stuff. So maybe that's why we're seeing, an uptick of the AirPods on the headphone side. We're not seeing it on the microphone side, which is good, because then that's not going to affect the quality. I think the Scarlett remains tried and true in the is the microphone audio interface, but looks like more people are plugging into their computer than maybe the Scarlett directly. Blue is coming down. Maybe that's some of the OG community advice from the coaches and education aspects of some jokes going on in the comments. Sorry. So maybe Blue's going out of popularity a little bit. Maybe people are getting kind of hip to cheaper microphones that sound better or more forgiving for their environment. I don't know. It's hard to speculate on this, but we still see a lot of podcasters and their guests using speakers. So that's hopefully this report and conversation brings more awareness to the importance of headphones versus speakers. Anything jump out at you, Julian?
No, I think you guys nailed it on the head, and I want to be mindful of time because we have about 15 minutes left. And I want to make sure we get to Q&A. So I do want to prompt people that if you do have questions, there is a separate box for asking a question. I believe it's just to your left that says ask a question. So please put your questions in there. And then before we do move on, Ivo made a good point that we all need to pull our money together to get Rock a mic stand. So I think we actually might have an extra one sitting around the studio, so we'll be able to send you one.
I am the voice for the regular guy podcasting who likes to keep it moving, who's always in a different place.
Keep it real.
Love it. I love it. Awesome. I think what is most interesting, this is great data, but I think that how the podcasting rhythms have actually shifted, and so I do want to show that before we go ahead and get into Q&A. So I'm going to jump ahead on the slides here.
Cool.
So if I keep getting roasted, we're just gonna have to end this, you guys. It's getting ugly.
I think we have the ability to kick him off, though, right, Zach?
Yeah, we can boot Evo, I think.
Awesome. So I do want to make sure that we take a look at the shift in the podcasting rhythms. And so as you can see, since the start of the year, and I imagine that a lot of this does have to do with, shelter in place and people maybe being on a little bit longer. But it's starting to creep into later in the day as well as the late in the evenings where people are recording with their guests. And also, the time that's recording, it's actually gone down. So I'm wondering if people are, getting on and not only preparing their guests, but then also having, a conversation, having a little empathy, understanding like what they've been going through before they go ahead and hit record. Would love your gents' thoughts on that.
Yeah, the time of day is really interesting to us to see that shift. We've also seen a lot of growth in other countries, so I think that's probably accounts for a large number of it. I know, forget exactly what week, but maybe we'll say 2 weeks ago or so, I saw that London was our most popular city. That's not normal. So thank you everyone in London. I'm glad we can help. That's awesome. More and more folks in Australia. So I do think that there's kind of an element of that to this change. But also, yeah, just people's schedules have radically shifted. Now being at home, not having commute, being kind of on these types of remote conversation sessions more often. So, I think it just kind of throws the whole schedule kind of for a loop and everything's kind of gotten reset. So there's probably a number of factors that contribute to that.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Rock?
Yeah, I mean, just from what I've seen, I just think everyone's schedule's all over the place now. So, that's just what I've seen there's just a different rhythm to our business and the way that we've been working. And so to me, it just feels like people are everyone's schedule, like I said, is different. And, whether people are working from home or having to, work and deal with kids at home and so maybe they're pushing a lot of things to later and they're not, we're running out of ESPN to watch, we're watching, we can only watch so many documentaries. Right. So, so I think that's probably what's going on. It is interesting that the time spent in session has gone down. I don't really know, I don't have a guess why. Do you guys have a guess why that kind of decreased a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, formats and shows shifting, new people coming on, maybe are doing shorter content, less time needed for setup. There's a lot of factors that could go into why we're seeing that decrease, but I mean, it's not much of a decrease. So I think it's, the average kind of recording time is not shown in the charts that metrics that we've gone into here, although we will be presenting the whole data report for you to download. So hang tight for that. There's more details in that report than we could cover in today's time. So we do see the average amount or recording duration. We see that is about, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. So, most people record about an hour recording, but then there's a lot of people who record, 10, 15 minutes, like the daily shows with our friends at ESPN. Those are very short. So I do think there's, just some of those kind of more macro changes that we're seeing in how people are experimenting with their length of their episodes and production.
I want to quickly highlight the last poll that went in. Thank you, Alex, for posting that. But just a question to the group, like how often do you want to see this data? Annually, quarterly, monthly highlights, or like would you love to see kind of like a real-time dashboard on the SquadCast site? So please knock that out. I think we've gotten about 10 right now, but would love to hear your responses there.
Yeah, looks like there's a lot of love for quarterly. We're open to ideas, so let us know what you think. And Evo, thank you for sharing shorter episodes. His show, Podcast Pontifications, I think is a great example of that. So not everything needs to be that, Joe Rogan 3 hours or kind of typical 1 hour, right? Especially now that folks aren't commuting, we can kind of play with that a little bit more and see what our listeners are into. And great points about, the need to homeschool. I think that is one forcing function to shift everybody's schedule as well into the evenings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for voting on that poll. And I think we can start to get into some Q&A, or where are we at with that, Julian?
Yeah, it's time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for staying with us. So yeah, let's go ahead and go into the questions. Let me see if I can see these.
And thank you, Alex and TJ. So there's a green button below our videos now to download the full remote podcast stats, or RPS. Maybe that'll catch on. RPS report. Check that out. And we're very grateful to be able to collaborate with StudioPod, bringing this data to the podcast community to help shed some real light on how we can have these best practices help us with our shows, recording quality content for our listeners. So thank you. Before we get too far into the questions, and looking through them now, so bear with me here.
Should we just go with the top one?
Yeah.
It looks like Roy D said, can SquadCast create a quality sounding podcast remotely with the person being interviewed using their phone?
Yes, and thank you, Roy. So it's a great question. The answer is yes, but it's a little more nuanced than that. So when we think of phones, we tend to think of phone calls, like dialing a number and having that phone call. SquadCast works as a web app on Android. So that's what I mean by on a phone. And Android is the most popular operating system across the world, kind of by quite the margin. Contrary to what some people think about iOS devices, those are the most popular here in the United States. But the
Easy Tiger.
World's a big place, right? Just throwing that out there. So that is hopefully is answering your question. So absolutely, what it comes down to at that point is you're recording the same quality as if you're on a laptop or a desktop. It's just that you're on a phone, which are very capable these days. And what becomes the kind of bottleneck for quality there is the environment and the microphone technique. Some of the best practices that we've mentioned, and there are really great microphones that can plug into mobile phones nowadays. Of course, a lot of them have great microphones on board, but you got to really make sure you're kind of talking directly into it, like you would here with this microphone. So just kind of some extra technique there. Getting into the second question, are there plans to be able to allow more than 3 additional people on a recording? You want to take this one, Rock?
Yeah, so right now, just so everyone's on the same sheet of music, we have a 4 participant maximum per session in SquadCast, and that's 1 host seat and then up to 3 guests. So that is where it's at for now. We are working on some things where we can provide like an audience or listener experience. So a different way to interact and collaborate. We have a lot of folks that have like a producer or a silent member that doesn't really need to have their audio being recorded and doesn't need to be on camera, if you will. But still is participating in some manner. So we're looking into that, and we're always exploring options to open that participant like on camera max, on audio max up. We're all about reliability. So we noticed that was going, the reliability significantly decreased when we had over 4 in a session. And then we also just through interviews with, various customers and other podcasters, like not many use cases needed over 4, although we are aware that there's certainly many. So it is something that we're looking into, but no solid plans right now.
Yeah. So are there still plans to bring SquadCast to Apple? I think that's a pretty easy one. Yes, that is something that we're working on. And we touched on kind of at length in our last webinar, so you can check that video out towards the end, I think in the Q&A there. But we're working with Apple on that. We support web standards. It's just that some of the web standards are not yet implemented fully on iOS and in Safari browsers. So we're working on a few different paths forward there, and Apple wants that to happen as well. Everybody wants that to happen. So hope that answers your question there. I have read through the private group with my RSS host and other groups online that recently SquadCast has had some issues with audio drift and original files not downloading, saving properly. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I fully read it. Yeah. So SquadCast is the only solution that has a patent pending for normalizing for this problem of audio drift. So there shouldn't be any problems with that. We make sure to save you that time in post-production so your audio always lines up. Now, occasionally, some hardware will come in that is using a really, really, really high sample rate, and we can warn the guest or the host about that sample rate, but we don't have the ability to change it. So we like to tell people we are partners in quality, just like I can't physically plug in your mic for you into your computer by writing any software. There's some limitations to how far we can go to really make the experience easy. So changing the sample rate is probably the solution to the person who saw things kind of get out of alignment there. As far as files showing up, we care deeply about reliability. We have backups, remember, that I mentioned, that are recorded automatically and contain the full conversation, in addition to our primaries, which have 2 layers of redundancy. So that's 3 layers of backups, all provided within the platform. So there shouldn't be any lost content ever on SquadCast. And that's all before human support, which we take very seriously as well. More questions around backups recording. Any recommendations on how to make a backup recording? We do that on platform, on SquadCast automatically. You can access them anytime. But you can also use different audio interfaces. We'll record to like SD. I know that's a popular setup where you could, let's say, use a Zoom H4n as your audio interface into SquadCast. We even have an article on how to kind of set that combo up in our support center. So check that out. And you can record on SquadCast, of course. At the same time, you can hit record on that Zoom H4n and it'll record to SD as well. It's important to note, though, that your guest audio will be traveling over the network, which will reduce the quality, unlike what's happening on SquadCast. So just be mindful of that.
I see we got a video recording question, Zach. You want to?
Yeah, happy to touch on that. And then I think we're in our last minute here, so we're really excited to be bringing a few updates to life this year, starting with our collaboration with Dolby Labs. Dolby, the innovative sight and sound company, that'll be landing within the near term here. We're working hard on it now to bring to life, and we have a whole webinar we recorded last month on that topic, so check that out. But then following shortly thereafter, we will be releasing quality video recording, which is something that we've been working on for a while now, and we're really excited to bring that to life because it's seemingly the first solution to this problem of people recording quality video, running into the same challenges that we have as podcasters. And we've solved a lot of those problems with the research and development that we've done on SquadCast, with our progressive uploads, automatic backups, drift normalization, all of those things. All of those things apply to video recording as well. So those will be recorded locally. We're still defining the standard there, but it's looking like will be 1080p MP4 files recorded locally for each individual participant, and backups as well there. So we're very, very excited about that and appreciate everybody's patience as we bring that to life for you.
It's definitely exciting news.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're right at time. Do you want to take one more, or should we wrap it up?
You are welcome, everybody in the chat. And let me take another. I want to make sure we get all these questions answered. Guests in the green room on SquadCast. The green room is like a backstage experience, so you can check all your equipment, make sure all that stuff is in order. You can check your hair and your microphone, and then when you join the session, that's when you actually establish that connection. The green room is more kind of a step removed, where you still have some privacy, and we find that really takes the pressure off, and a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from the community. Video recording, OBS. A lot of people are doing it with OBS today with like screen recording, so that's kind of a way to do it in the near term. But we'll be adding it native to the platform with that same level of quality here soon.
Well, thank you everyone who's signing off. I'm seeing everyone in the chat. This really means a lot. And we'll, it looks like everyone enjoyed the presentation, so we can definitely continue to do this. Big thank you to TJ and Julian from StudioPod. The quality, I mean, us at SquadCast, we care about quality, but we couldn't have had it this high quality without their help. So thank you so much, guys, for helping us out present this report to the rest of the community.
Yeah, most definitely. And thank you, gents, for allowing us to be a part of it. If people do have more questions about StudioPod, you can reach out, info@studiopod.com. We're also StudioPod SF everywhere on social. I'm Julian, as mentioned, TJ as well, if you want to reach out to us directly. But really appreciate being a part of this.
And we'll be back apparently on a quarterly basis or something. So
yeah, this is not the last report we'll publish. So click that green button down there, and we'll be posting this video on our blog and on our YouTube channel as well. If you didn't get a chance to check out the data in the first half, or you came on later on, connect with other folks in the chat, and hope we got to everybody's questions. We're at SquadCast FM everywhere on social. We're big parts of the community. We love the podcast community, and very grateful to be able to be of service. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to help with your remote interviews and capture that quality audio for your listeners. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.